In this video, I'm going to do a quick introduction to moments. So a moment is a turning force, a force that turns, and it's caused by a force which is a perpendicular distance from a pivot. So first of all, let's remember that perpendicular simply means at right angles, and a pivot is just a point that something turns around. So for example, if you open a door, that door turns around the pivot, which is the hinge. And later on in the course, we'll be able to calculate a moment, and a moment is equal to the force times that perpendicular distance from the pivot. So if we take this example here, this triangle represents the pivot, and then we have a big long beam, and at the end of the beam we have a force that's acting down, and that force F is a distance D from the pivot, and that is going to try and pull this down the way. And if this is stuck at that end and that force pushes it down, then what ends up is that you actually have a moment that turns anti-clockwise. It's going to turn in a circle about that pivot, so it will probably just go around in a circle about that pivot. So I'll just try and draw that until it's stopped. Okay, and it'll go in that direction, which is anti-clockwise. Now we'll look at that later in the course, but today I just want to introduce you to moments. And here I have a moment system. Okay, so it's actually just a tin, and what happens is the lid turns about that hinge there. So if I turn this, the lid turns about that hinge, and that hinge is the pivot of the system. And if I add a force to the end, just like that, then the weight of that pen is going to act down the way. Now, for me to lift this at the moment, that's quite light, so that doesn't require an awful lot of effort. But if I take the pen out and put in some Pritt stick, which is much heavier, then that moment is actually going to be much bigger, and it takes me an awful lot more effort to move that lid to work against that moment caused by the Pritt stick. The other thing is, if I lift the lid from here, a big distance away from the hinge, then actually, that's not too hard. Whereas if I lift it quite close to the hinge, then I have to apply quite a big force to get that lid to move. So what we're saying here is that moments have something to do with the force that acts at the distance from the pivot, but also something to do with the distance that the force is from the pivot. And we're going to do a couple of experiments to figure out what that relationship is. Okay, so that's just an introduction, and I hope that helps.